Good morning. Thank you for joining us this morning for an important conversation on race and policing at the municipal level. My name is Nancy Solomon, and I'm the manager of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion with the City of Somerville. Before we get started, I want to make sure everyone knows that we do have live captioning available in Spanish, English, Portuguese, Haitian Creole, and Nepali. And we're going to put the link to that in the chat box. Our panelists today include our Mayor, Joseph Curtatone, the Mayor of Cambridge, Mayor Sumbul Siddiqui, our Chief of Police, David Fallon, and joining the Chief is Patty Contete, social worker and head of community outreach and health and recovery program housed in the Sumbul Police Department. Before we get started, I do want to leave a couple minutes for remarks from our Mayor.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Nancy, and I want to thank everyone on the panel. I wanted to take a brief moment, folks, first to thank you for joining us in this conversation, and thank you in advance for the questions and comments you've sent to us and that you'll pose to us this morning, and look forward to engage with you. But I want to want to take this opportunity because some of you have written and raised some questions. I want to provide some clarity on the purpose of today's dialogue before I hand it off to Nancy Solomon to facilitate. So today's dialogue was initiated by our Director of Equity Inclusion, Nancy Solomon, and I want to thank her for that. Nancy facilitates our regular community dialogues like our Immigrant Police Dialogue, which is done quarterly. Again, she coordinates our police dialogues, which are regular events between the police and the public. And today's forum is in part an expansion of that dialogue so that the public could have access and conversations with Chief Fallon and the police department. But it's also the next dialogue in our series of conversation that started really early this week with the dialogue on systemic racism, where we had leaders like Ayanna Presley, Rachel Rollins, local leaders like Andre Green, Willem Barr, and others, Yvonne Spicer. And it's important that we have these dialogues and elevate and amplify the voices closest to pain, and that we listen. As with the immigrant dialogues, again, we're here and we have the police. We want to speak with and hear from the public. But I also wanted my administration and me to be responsive and available to speak with anyone in the public as well. And because Cambridge is our neighbor and what we do impacts each other, we invited Mayor Siddiqui to join us as well. And we're grateful to her, not only for joining us, but I'm grateful for her leadership. We also have listening sessions available, and there will be certainly more opportunities to discuss and engage as we take on the important work we need to do as a community and as a society. But again, the purpose of today's meeting is to make Chief Fallon, my administration, and me available to the public. And again, we're joined by an inspirational leader in Cambridge, Sumbul Siddiqui, and we look forward to engaging with this conversation. But there's a lot more to come and a lot more work to do. So thank you. At this time, I'm going to hand off to Nancy and look forward to engaging with all of you. Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you, Mayor. Again, thank you all for joining us this morning for this conversation. Although not new, the recent killings of Black men and women at the hands of police have moved the conversation of racism and police brutality to the forefront and has intensified calls for immediate action. For many, these killings have brought us to a new moment. Racism, police brutality, and its disproportionate impact on Black and Brown people is our undeniable reality. So today, we're not here to debate that reality, but to hear about what our city is going to do to address it. For those who haven't had a chance, as the Mayor mentioned, we did have a conversation earlier this week on structural racism. And if you haven't seen it, I do urge you to go to our city's YouTube page and take a look. Because this moment is calling for a reimagining of what policing should look like. That is our conversation today, as the Mayor stated. We want to see how municipalities are responding to this new call, and specifically, how is our city responding? The first portion of this hour-long forum will be the panel discussion. But the second half, we want to hear directly from you. We want to hear and answer your questions and know what's going on your end, your personal experiences, and to hear your ideas. So thank you again for joining us. I do want to get started with the panel discussion so that we can leave enough time for the Q&A. Our first question is to you, Mayor Curtatone. You've been very vocal about committing the city to addressing structural racism and systematic inequities by transforming our approach to policing. Can you elaborate on the city's plan? Mayor, you need to unmute.
I should know this by now. Thank you for the reminder. Again, thank you for the question. We know we don't need any other proof, research, or evidence that racism is a social determinant of health. And as a policymaker, myself, and I know Mayor Siddiqui will chime in here, we impact people's lives in many ways in policies around housing, public safety, health, education, transportation, the environment, all other social determinants of health that we measure to determine the impacts of our decisions on people's lives and whether or not we're truly creating an equitable, healthy, and just society. But persistent racism results in continued discrimination in all these areas of life, some which I just mentioned. So we declared, which many communities have followed, structural racism to be a public health crisis, to set the table and the lens to which we need to do the work as a community and as a society to root out structural racism in the systems and all these systems that impact our lives. We are obviously having a conversation directly about public safety now, and the murders of George Floyd and so many others have certainly not only made me upset, angered me as well as so many other Americans, and should put a light on policing as well, because we know policing, this is the agency charged with upholding the health and the safety of our community. I'm proud of the work we've done in the Somerville Police Department over the past 15 years to reform, but I agree with the calls that we need to not just reimagine, but dismantle and reconstruct policing to something that truly meets the needs of a just society that promotes the health and well-being of everyone in the community. So the declaration of racism as a health crisis is the launchpad for the work that has to be done. And in doing this work, we need to amplify those voices closest to the pain. Again, this is something I always want to admire, and I continue to admire Congresswoman Presley for, that those closest to the pain need to be the ones closest to the power for change. And we need to amplify those voices as we think about how do we engage in the work of reimagining policing. And we want to start that here in Somerville with what we're calling the Racial and Social Justice Project, to create the department, but to do the work of not just reimagining policing, but tackle and eviscerate racism from all those other systems in our lives that I've mentioned and more, or else we're never going to be the just and healthy society that is fair and accessible to everyone.
Thank you, Mayor. You've also stated that as an ally, you're committed to listening to the Black and Brown people who are the ones affected by structural racism and letting those folks lead the change. Can you elaborate on how the city will be leading this effort?
I'm sorry, Nancy, that was for me. I missed the first part. You were cut off.
Sure. Mayor, you've stated that as an ally, you are committed to listening to the Black and Brown people who are the ones affected by structural racism and letting those folks lead the change. So can you elaborate on how the city will be leading this effort?
It's important. Thank you. I am committed not just as a white ally, and I am very aware as a white person in a position of privilege and power, my responsibility to not just listen, but to hear those voices and to provide the resources for the voices of the community to lead and push the dial in a very dramatic way for substantive and sustainable change. And I want to do that. We need to all do that, not just by listening. We need to listen. We need to have this conversation because the perspective of those voices closest to those experiences and that pain should pluck a value string in all of us. And again, I go back to, we should never forget what happened to George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, Rashad Brooks, and so many others. That should pluck a value string and elevate a sense of shame in all of us to understand that we need to get off, when I say we, especially white America, get off the backs of our chair and own this work while amplifying the voices of those closest to the pain. So the efforts we want to take as an administration, as in a city, is to provide those tools and resources and launching that work, which will not be easy, which will make people like me feel very uncomfortable, and we should be made to feel uncomfortable, but to own the work together and get it done. I mean, we need to get beyond rhetoric. We need to get beyond platitudes. But in doing so, I've also come to learn the importance of not co-opting those voices and that narrative of listening, because that perspective of those closest to pain provides the context and gives history perspective enough to understand why those experiences are important to drive the work that needs to be done.
Thank you, Mayor. Next, I want to ask this question to Mayor Siddiqui. Mayor Siddiqui, thank you for joining our panel discussion today. The work of dismantling structural racism looks different across municipalities, so we thought it'd be interesting to have you as the mayor of Cambridge to hear how your city is reimagining the role of policing.
Sure, thank you for the question, and thank you to the Somerville team for having me here today. I think that as we've seen and as Mayor Curtatone just said, declaring racism as a public health crisis is a start. And then what happens after and the actions our cities take is what really is the goal. So our city and our residents have been so moved by the national conversation on reimagining public safety and how we can creatively think about how to protect all our residents. And as has been said, when George Floyd was murdered, it was a traumatic visual of our nation's history with how Black bodies have been treated for over 400 years. And this has all created a big sense of urgency in our city like we've never seen before. So myself, the city manager, Louis De Pasquale, my colleagues on the city council, we received upwards of 4,000 emails of residents demanding information on how our police department operates, how the Cambridge Police Department stacked up in terms of the 8 can't wait policies, how we allocate funding, and if it does more harm than help to the residents needing services the most. So for all of this, it's opened our eyes and it's been a lot of difficult conversations that will be ongoing. And we have to look at how the systems we take for granted, and if those, are better suited for certain roles as opposed to all the roles we've assigned them over the years. So based on the communications and what we heard from the community, we decided to reallocate about 2.1 million of the Cambridge Police Department's budget, the increase from this year, and said, the council has key priorities: affordable housing, early childhood, and there were certain positions that, because we were going to hold off on these positions, we said, let's reallocate this funding and make sure that some of these positions are funded July 1st. And this includes positions in our city manager's housing office, early childhood positions, and so forth. So the council, this all came from priorities that the council saw. And we know this is just the tip, right? The tip of the social justice iceberg as we start to begin a conversation about what it looks like to have a different role for public safety. I think a lot of it, the arguments have said, defund the police, defund the police. But what does that truly look like? And how do we, really think about the budget as a moral document at the same time working with our Cambridge Police Department? I think our commissioner is very committed to reflecting. And as soon as the 8 can't wait came out, he said, there are these policies. We have basically all of them, but the duty to intervene wasn't really clear and concise and written in. So immediately we changed that, right? And so it's about being reflective and saying, look, we may be a great police department in terms of this, and this, but there's also a lot of change and perspective that may be necessary, and some reimagining that needs to happen. And as has been mentioned, it's key to really be led in this movement by Black and Brown people, those individuals who are targeted by police more often than their white counterparts. So, while we've met some of these policies and we've enacted a lot of our own policies that most departments in the country don't have around racial awareness and implicit bias trainings, this national conversation is guiding us to push further and to not get complacent. So I think many of us would agree there's always more work to be done around racial justice. So we have to really think about growing and reimagining, and there can always be room for improvement. And so that's, I think, for us as we reimagine our policing structure, what we'll take into account some of the other voices that we don't always see, right? And that includes immigrant rights organizers and undocumented residents, as well as disability rights organizers and disabled residents. So as we've seen with the recent killing of Elijah McClain, a 23-year-old introverted, differently abled young Black man, we have to understand how residents, when maybe we don't understand the same social cues. So, unfortunately, police officers generally aren't as equipped with so many of the cultural language contexts that are required to de-escalate a situation and provide help if needed. And I think that's one area our department is constantly working on and is committed to. So very concretely, on Monday, I and many of my colleagues on the council have co-sponsored a policy order requesting the city look into an alternate public safety response system, and in general look into alternate systems that have been successfully implemented around the country, such as Cahoots in Oregon. So we're requesting the city to evaluate and consider an effective unarmed public health and human services response mechanism, like in Oregon, Miami, Dallas, and so forth, to really think about what redefining public safety can look like, and develop an alternate public health response with the ultimate goal of decreasing arrests, increasing connections to critical housing. And many of this, I will say, our department does already, but we are trying to look at how we can complement some of this work and make it more streamlined. There's a lot our police are doing that perhaps we can take off their plates and other departments actually can do better. So we're also in the midst of creating a task force that will continue the work on discussing and dismantling structural racism that's woven into many of our cities' systems, the police department included. So we have a lot of work to do, but I think we've started these conversations and we really want to be self-reflective and reimagine with the right people at the table and the right voices. So we're spending a lot of time planning for that and coming out with a series of concrete policy actions and goals.
That's great. Thank you so much, Mayor, for sharing your perspective and all the information on what the city of Cambridge is doing. I think it's really important for us as a neighboring city to know what you're doing and to work together. This next question is for Chief Fallon. Chief, many are questioning the role of police officers as first responders to instances of mental illness and drug overdoses. What do you view the role of police officers to be? And what are the best avenues that you see for the police department and the community to address these concerns together? Chief, you're muted.
Like Mayor Curtatone said, I should realize that as well at this point. And I apologize for that, but I want to thank both mayors for speaking so eloquently on the need for change. And, in Somerville, at the Somerville Police Department, we're excited to partner with the community on strategic, methodical change. And I think our role right now is about listening. I think we've made great strides. Just to put things in context, the Somerville Police Department has made great strides towards, we had the 8 can't wait in our policies, when we started looking at them. But policies are important and accountability is important. But policing departments, it's really about culture. What's the culture of your department? In the Somerville Police Department, I believe you have a culture that upholds the guardian mentality. And we're teaching officers, we're guardians of our community, but there's always going to be a role for police within the community, a vital role. So, we need to work with our officers. We need to work with the community to get the the best policing model in place. It's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of listening. And it's going to take, as Mayor Curtatone said, input from the voices of the community that are most impacted by policing. We need to listen to those voices. We need to make strategic, methodical change in how we police. And, I think we get a lot of things right in Somerville. And I was glad the mayor of Cambridge, pointed out that the Cambridge police get a lot of things right. But any profession needs to continually evolve and needs to improve. And we're excited about listening and being drivers of change on a nationwide level. We've done so much work with our core program, so much training around bias-based policing and how we train officers and teaching officers to be the conduit, to connect people to services in the community. We talk about it almost at every roll call. Arrest it should be the last option for a police officer. Arrest is the last option. Work with members of the community to get them the services they need. It's vitally important. And this is a start. And Mayor Curtatone pointed out, this is just the beginning. This is the beginning of a long road. I want to be methodical about change. I want to be thoughtful about change. And I also want to recognize the hard work of the men and women of the Somerville Police Department that have brought into a culture that upholds the sanctity of life and looks at themselves as guardians. Nancy, we work very close. You run the immigrant dialogues. We need to listen. We changed, maybe 5 years ago, we do walking dialogues where officers meet young people from teen empowerment in the parks, and we walk the community. We started this listening process 5 years ago. We need to continue to listen. We need to continue to work hard to change. And, I'm excited about this. I think it's I watched the video of George Floyd, and it was devastating. As a human being, as a police officer, absolutely devastating to watch. It shocks the conscience. And to say it can't happen again is empty, is empty words. The mayor's been, pushing for these changes, driving these changes. We're listening to everybody, and we want to be part of the change. We want to be part of the progress, not in policing, but part of the progress on race in this country and the impacts it has on people. So I'm excited to be here today. I'm excited for the future, and I'm excited to work with all the leaders and listen to the most vulnerable in our community on how we get there, how we make progress.
Thank you, Chief. And next question is for Patty. Patty, as a social worker and head of the Community Outreach Help and Recovery Program that is housed in the Sumbul Police Department, can you tell us about your program and how you see this program as fitting into the calls for changing the role of law enforcement in responding to nonviolent calls?
Hi, Nancy. Thank you so much. And thank you, mayors of Somerville and Cambridge and the chief for inviting me to the conversation. I've been very fortunate to work in the city of Somerville. I started in 2008. And fortunate to have been able to start work with the Somerville Police Department in 2010. At that time, I was the clinical youth specialist, and one of my primary programs was the Trauma Response Network. That network was a group of community members who would provide postvention after a tragedy in the community. And so that gave me an opportunity to work with police because police often played a role in those responses as well. Our change, our core unit, came about as a grassroots effort, working with stakeholders in the community, from the Homeless Coalition to DMH service providers, to Bay Cove and CASFAR service providers, some school folks, teen empowerment. And we had already been starting these conversations related to suicide prevention and trauma response. And it was the police department that reached out to the health department to initiate change. They recognized the need, as Mayor from Cambridge noted, responses to behavioral health are very complex. They include trauma-informed training, social cues, as you've mentioned, cultural understanding, that there are differences in how people react, approach, based on their life circumstances, their culture, their perspective on the world. And so we were really fortunate to begin working with the Somerville Police Department at a time when there was a call from the Department of Mental Health for jail diversion for vulnerable populations. We know that the rate of individuals with mental illness are 5 times overrepresented in the criminal justice system. We know that we're not doing a great job of engaging people with substance use and addiction. We know also, and what we found when we started our jail diversion grant in 2012, this provided me an opportunity to understand further what the police department does, what information they have access to, and I discovered an amazing intervention point. That officers responding to these calls, as the chief said, you know, I would love to take credit for having an impact in officers not arresting. They were already doing that work when I started working with them. And so they really understood some of the complexities. And so with the jail diversion program, we saw this wonderful opportunity to engage people. I sat at the health department for about 5 years as a mental health resource, information access point, got very, very little referrals, very little people who I could reach out to. Working with the Somerville Police Department, the police are part of the community. They are out there 24/7. They see people in their environment, in our community. They understand the stressors and the stimulus. So when we started this work, what we found was it was an opportunity to connect across systems. So my program being within the Somerville Police Department allowed us to connect with providers at Cambridge Health Alliance, other hospitals, providers at the time it was Caspar, now it's Bay Cove and their outreach team and their residential programs, providers like VinFen. Actually, our first jail diversion request came from VinFen, a DMH provider. They reached out to us because they were having difficulty, and it wasn't me. They reached out to the police department because they recognized that one of the individuals in their care was, you know, kind of struggling, was putting themselves at risk, wandering into streets in the middle of the night, not able to follow through with treatment recommendations. They knew that this individual was putting themselves at risk, but they had no authority, no avenue to request a higher level of care. They reached out to the Somerville Police Department, and the police department said, oh yeah, we know Pepsi. We see them all the time. Oh, you want? Sure, we have 200 encounters with this individual. We're happy to know they never once arrested this individual. Never once. 200 encounters. And so I think, you know, I'm concerned. I was horrified to be in 2020 and to see, as the chief mentioned, George Floyd murdered without any care that it was being recorded. To see those 3 officers stand by and not have enough knowledge to intervene was heart-wrenching to me. Heart-wrenching. We do need, I absolutely agree, we need to address systemic racism. However, nationally, yes, there's a call to action, and it's well pointed and well deserved. However, we know that change happens locally. And I am extremely concerned that we are not addressing the starting point. Police in Somerville are doing the work. Over the last 17 years, we have put in place all of the dialogues, community engagement. If we look at the 6 pillars of President Obama's 21st century policing, this information is not new. We need to implement it. And what I would say to the community is come and talk with us. Meet the officers. We have a diverse frontline officer staff. Yes, there's more work to do. We're working on promoting people of color within the system. We have a system where we collaborate with providers to understand trauma-informed response. We are the regional center for some Northeast departments on crisis intervention team training, and Cambridge Police is a significant partner in that project. We provide in that training We recognized back when Black Lives Matter started about 6 years ago that this was an important topic to have in our conversations in our CIT training. And so we do. We actually got feedback from officers. We started off with an hour and 15 minutes because that's the time frame of the workshop. And we had to expand it because of officer feedback. Officers wanted and recognized we need more time because these are complex issues. Cambridge Police has a social justice unit where their youth division, their safety net program, has been in place for years doing case management. That's amazing. Case management. Now there's an argument we're looking at, is there a better response? Should social workers be the lead? I will tell you, we already have that response in Massachusetts. So it's hard to look at Oregon, Dallas, in other, Arkansas has also some great programs. Every state has a unique system. In Massachusetts, our behavioral health system instituted psychiatric emergency response teams. Those are available to every community. That is exactly what you're talking about, very similar to Cahoots, where a clinician goes out in the community. They have mobile crisis. They go out in the community to respond. You will see, if you look at Cambridge police data, if you look at Somerville police data, that oftentimes those individuals feel that things are escalated to a point where there's a safety issue. And so police are asked to respond. I can tell you personally, I've been on calls for service with police officers. I've gone out on calls for service. And ultimately, I need the assistance of an officer, not because, you know, people are violent, but because it's intense. It's intense. People are in crisis and they really need to have safety. I, as a social worker, cannot prevent someone from running out of their home into traffic. I can't do that. I cannot ask them to search their person because, you know, to get to the hospital, we want to make sure everyone's safe, including them. You know, there was recently that very sad incident in Southborough, the Southborough Police Department. I think that we need to really begin to look locally. What is Cambridge Police started their own academy. Cambridge Police is one of the first police departments to be trauma informed. We've been fortunate to partner with them. I've talked to a number of detectives who had an opportunity to attend that trauma informed training and gain knowledge. So again, I think that, you know, one of the things we always say is healthcare should be addressing this. And I absolutely agree. It is healthcare's role. However, we do not have appropriate systems in place. I really would encourage people to really look locally at what is in place. Talk to service providers. The Homeless Coalition, one of the misnomers is for substance use, one of our tools to ensure safety for people, which I do not promote, it is a last resort, is a Section 35 when someone is at life-threatening risk for substance use disorder. If you look at our state laws, I, as a clinician, cannot apply for that. It's only police officers, doctors, and blood relatives. A program staff member cannot apply for a 35. So we've had to partner. They reach out to us to say, we are concerned about this individual. Can you assist us? So I could go on, but it's very, very disheartening to me to see funds taken from the police department. Somerville Police has already historically been understaffed in terms of our community. I know because I try to be measured when I ask officers to attend with me. I would love them to come out with us more. I would love for them to attend more meetings. But the reality is they need to be out in the community. When I first started, and this will be the last point I made, when I first started with the department in 2010, I think it was around 2013, 14, there was an initiative, a regional initiative with Everett and Cambridge around focused deterrence. And that, you know, was to really kind of reach out to people at high risk, people with criminal behavior who were re-entering the community, to say, hey, we know that behavior is hard to change. We want to support you. We have services in place. Here's social workers, here's housing, here's employment resources. We want to work with you to be able to sustain your life in the community and improve your quality of life. That project, at the time, the department said, okay, sure, we have community police officers who can work with you, Patty. Do you know every meeting at that time, a community officer would show up and say, Patty, I'm sorry, I gotta go. I've been called into patrol because we're short-staffed. You can't have effective programming with that kind of consistency. And my concern is that we're again going backwards in time in terms of this initiative. Defunding the police is not the solution necessarily. We need to look at each department, each specific police department. Not all police departments are the same.
Thank you, Patty. I'm being mindful of time. Thank you for all that perspective. I do want to open it up to our Q&A at this time because we are going till 11:30, and I want to give people an opportunity to pose questions to our panelists. We have been receiving many questions regarding defunding the police, folks wanting an average cut of 60% and rejecting any budget with less than 10%. And I would, in order to fund social services. So I'd like to pose that question to the mayor and to the chief, and to hear your perspective on that.
Thank you, Nancy. And I want to build upon the comments that were just made, especially Patty Contente's. I think it's important that we have context. And when we make these types of decisions, we're fully informed. I agree that we need to seriously look at how we reallocate and reprioritize funding to other services in need around social and human services. We're doing that in Somerville. But as Patty mentioned, I invite everyone to get better context by looking at what we do in the Somerville Police Department and what Cambridge does. We've embedded a lot of those services, but that's also a consequence that as a society, we haven't really addressed those needs in other agencies. So there's an opportunity to invest in that. And part of what we want to do with the Racial and Social Justice Project, and we've reallocated about $750,000, $750,000 from our police department to that project, put in another $250,000, that's $1 million on the city side, to one, hire a director, launch the work, the community work, to be led by the community, by those voices closest to the pain with the greatest perspective, to reimagine policing. Not to mention we've funding $600,000 of school programs towards this project. And this is a long-term effort. We have a lot of work to do. We need to launch the work. I would state, well, I agree we need to reimagine or deconstruct and rethink how policing is and what it should look like in Somerville and in every community in this country. Somerville Police Department, only their budget represents about 6.6% of the total Somerville budget, just from a financial perspective, to give people clarity and context. And in terms of the department and its size, we're one of the smallest departments for any major city size, per capita in the greater metropolitan area, as well as when you compare us to departments around the country. What we've invested in over the past more than 15 years as we took on the police department, the chief was a rank and file officer when we took on this effort, took on special interests of the union, adopted a community-based policing model, invested in services like social service programs and social workers in our department, many, many more that Patricia, Patty has alluded to, was part of that work we did with the community. And that's why the Somerville Police Department has been lauded nationally. It's seen as a model and a training partner. That's why leaders like Chief Dave Fallon were nominated to then President Obama as a champion of change. But we know, and this is not to give ourselves, congratulatory pats on the back, that should give us context and lessons to help us and educate us as we think about what reimagining should be. What is work? What are the lessons learned? What can we extrapolate from here and invest and really build out in the rest of our systems in our community to think about how we service our community better? Police officers are asked to do so much. And a lot of that change, I want to recognize the men and women and the command staff of the police department to drive that change. It wasn't easy. And we have our department, as the chief mentioned, we've adopted eight enough, and we've adopted the Campaign Zero, and we have model progressive policing. So I want to make sure as we make recommendations for cuts, 10 or 60%, understand that's going to have a detrimental impact on the workforce there. And the youngest, most diverse part of the Somerville Police Department, and the way it works in Massachusetts and collective bargaining and civil service, you're the last one on the job, you're the first one out. When you have a reduction in force, it would have greatly reduced our efforts to be as flexible and responsive, even in this framework of policing, which I admit in the historical context of policing and how the framework that's developed over time is flawed, needs to change. And we receive tens of thousands of calls for service every year in the department that requires the police officer present. And we still have, even though we're a very safe community, serious crimes against people and property. And that will hamper or really jeopardize our ability, compromise our ability to be responsive to that and follow through on that. So as we make decisions, recommendations, let's be informed. My job as I make a recommendation to spend or reallocate or cut something is to provide information and context and evidence behind it. So I ask the community to engage us in this work. I believe across the board cuts without that context and information is dangerous. And we have an inherent responsibility. One of our prime responsibilities is to protect the health and well-being of everyone in the community. We need to do that while we undertake this important work of reimagining policing.
Thank you, Mayor. Before I hand this over to the chief for his perspective, I do want to make sure that folks know that we are taking questions live. You can go to the chat box at the bottom of your screen and submit those questions, and we'll be working to answer as many questions as possible during the time that we have. If we do run out of time, we will still work to make sure that we answer those questions. Thank you. Chief, do you want to add any comments to the mayor?
Yeah, I do. And we talk about conversations. I've had conversations with the mayor in the past about increasing the number of police officers. The mayor's always held the line about not increasing the number of police officers. And he always stressed with me about, we're not going to increase the intensity of policing. We're going to change the culture. We're going to change how we do things to be guardians of our community. I mean, we've had those conversations. Somerville has the fewest officers per capita of the 25 most populous cities in Massachusetts. I just think we have to put that in context. About 25,000 times a year, residents of Somerville are calling the police department and saying, we need services. The rhetoric, I think, is gone. It's getting, some of the rhetoric is anti-police, I believe, and people should be supporting the Somerville police officers. I think Patty said it perfectly. Get to know your officers. Get to know who they are, because they are members of this community, and you should be proud of them. I'm proud of them because I see what they do every day. I see how they interact with the public. Let's improve upon that. There was recent talk about cutting the police department, 60, 10%, and one of the big push was to cut supervisors. I mean, severely cut supervisors. You're going to cut accountability. You're going to cut the people in the department that's tasked with holding people accountable to our policies, to our very progressive policies and procedures. We're very, numbers-wise, we're a very small department. Our offices are our programs. Our offices are your programs. And our supervisors, they don't supervise, they have positions, they have jobs. When you talk about cutting lieutenants, they're the commanders. They run a shift. They run the shift. That's most often they're the highest ranking person in the building. They're setting the tone for that shift. It's not strictly supervision. They're working. Our supervisors work. We work harder. We do less with. We do more with less than any other department around. We have to continue to improve. I think the conversation should be around how do we partner to make progress, not to step back. They talk about the crime numbers going down. You need less officers. If you got a winning hand, don't throw it away. Improve upon it. Continue to move forward. That's what we need to do.
So Nancy, I could just add to what the chief said, and when we make these comments, this is not to be defensive. I think it's important that what we've done, what we learned, what works and doesn't in policing here locally is important context, because we do, I hope people understand that. And let me clarify, I agree, we need to think about dismantling, reconstructing policing in a way that meets the needs again, because policing historically is built on a flawed framework, but we made so much progress here in Sumbul, but there are lessons learned that speak to the need to continue some of that progress, or also to reinvest in other areas that go into the work of reimagining policing, and to build that model out before we end something, we need something to take its place because, again, we have tens of thousands of calls per year.
Thank you both. Other questions that have come in. What can our cities do to reduce our reliance on overtime for police now in the short term as a step towards shifting funding to housing, healthcare, and other community needs? What can we expect to see in 30, 60, and 90 days in terms of policy change?
I'm happy to start. I'm sure the chief will chime in. It is, and thank you for the question. By the way, I apologize. Everyone who sent in a question or comment before and during this, thank you very much. And thank you for this question. It's an interesting one, and it's a good one, as they all are. It is a function of the collective bargaining agreement. And, you know, people get paid regular time when they get called in for overtime, or when a shift requires you to be paid out of grade. And what we need to do and this is also to keep in context, because as we lose positions in the police department, it's not a one-for-one savings because there's unemployment. There's officers will then have to be called in to work overtime to cover shifts that we are obligated to implement and put out in the streets and in the community, and that will add to the costs. So it's important information as part of the context as we make decisions. What are the consequences if you cut 10% of the police department, if you lose so much of your workforce? I was speaking to Mayor McGee and Lynn. He's been the mayor over the last year or so in Lynn. When he first came on, he said they were working triple time shifts, many of their offices. That is a financial impact on the budget. But I also want to point out that on the individual officer, it really imposes a lot of stress to work so many shifts, to be part of so many responses and scenes that can have traumatizing effects and impacts on people. And I think we can all agree we don't want overworked, exhausted, stressed police officers out in our community. So there'll be, what we can do is, as we reimagine, it'll be part of the collective bargaining process, as well as we develop a new framework. We're going to have to think about, you know, what the financial implications will be. But that's important.
Yeah, and I hope just to follow up, Nancy, can I follow up to what the mayor said at this time?
Please do.
Yeah, I think, you know, again, this is just, you know, a lot of these responses are just to add context to a conversation that's going to be a long conversation. You know, when it comes to public safety and providing public safety to the residents of Somerville, as the chief of police, I have to be methodical and I have to really think things through. And that's going to be part of listening to the community, taking things in, and working with the community, working with every member of this community, working with the city council, working with the mayor's office on driving change. Re-examining, you know, how we police and how we spend our money. But it's not a decision that you're going to make overnight. And as the chief of police, I got to ensure that we provide public safety. And the mayor made a great point about officer wellness. Many times in the city of Somerville, we have 7 patrol cars on the street for 82,000 people. I mean, and then we go below that. That's where at our current staffing level, we have to do what's called a forced holdover. And recently, this year, we had 60 forced holdovers. So officers are working a day shift. They get a call at the end of the shift and say, you're working the first half, you're working till midnight. No options. That's a big effect on the officers and a big effect on officer wellness. And as we move forward, we have to keep that in mind. Officer wellness is vitally important. There's a lot of talk about research in policing right now. And one of the quotes that I always say, and I've said it to some police officers 1,000 times, every interaction you have with this community can affect this community for generations. And every interaction you have with an individual in this community can affect that individual for the rest of their lives. We need officers that are grounded, that are well-trained, that are empathetic, and that are compassionate. And that's what we have in Somerville. Those are your Somerville police officers. They care about the community. They're the guardians of the community. Let's stand with them. Let's stand behind them. And let's continue to make progress
So Nancy,
together.
2 other points of context on this. Historically, one of the other factors, not the only one, obviously we undertook reforming and changing the entire deployment structure, police department. We had rampant overtime abuse, and going back 15 plus years, and sick time abuse. That has been curtailed greatly as part of that reform. And even recently, there were substantial cuts in overtime. So more narrowly to this person's questions, we need to manage it real time in any structure of deployment, and moving forward as we reimagine a new policing formula or framework, we need to consider the structure we implement and manage that so we keep overtime.
Thank you both. We had another question come in, and this one is for either the mayor or for the chief to answer. The question is, my Latina female friend was going to apply for the cadet program that was cut. As a Black female resident, we thought this program was a great way to increase minority recruits, and it helped pay for classes at Bunker Hill. Can you explain why a program designed for Black and Brown community members was cut, and how that aligns with your commitment to the Black and Brown community that I'm a part of?
Well, it's a great question, and I think it's something we need to work towards getting that, and that shows you the progressive thinking at the city and the Sumbul Police Department. And I think it wasn't taken off the table. I think it was put on hold, but I think it's something that we want to accomplish. It's something that we need to accomplish. And it also brings to like the 5 candidates that we currently have in the Sumbul Police Department. We've worked so hard to get this group ready for the academy and to bring before the city council. Out of the 5, the breakdown of the 5 is 2 of the officers or the recruits are African American, one's Indian that speaks 2 dialects, and one's a dreamer. A dreamer. We're hiring a dreamer. We want to send a message to every immigrant or undocumented or non-resident in this community. This is us. This is who we are. We're excited to bring to onboard these. These are going to be the agents of change in this community, in policing in general. That's why the message is help us continue on with the progress. Be a partner with us in progress. Stand with us. Stand shoulder to shoulder with the officers that you put on this police department, that you hired to be guardians of this community. Stand with us. We're going to stand with you. Stand with us as we continue to move forward.
Thank you for this question as well. We believe in the program, and I echo what the chief said. It's just on hold on the table right now as we have to make funding decisions. The reason for the cadet program, some context, under the civil service system, which Somerville is part of, our hiring is based on your score on a test. It's been extremely difficult, and we've been very fortunate to have, in recent years, recruited very diversified staff in the police department, rank and file officers, men and women, people of different ethnic backgrounds and races that have better reflect the makeup of the community. But it is difficult because the civil service system is where you're placed on the test and you go down that pecking order unless there's some reasons that you should not be hired. And the same for promotions. We submit that as part of the racial social justice project, something the community should consider is look at that, whether that's the process we want to continue. So as a response to the limitations of the civil service system, the cadet program, really the chief championed this, work with community members to get more people understanding what policing is and the role of it in the community, and attract more people, especially a diverse cohort of candidates, not just applicants, candidates to the department in the future. And unfortunately, it has been placed on hold right now, but I'd submit that and many other things will have to be considered by us as a community as we think about what policing looks like and how we want to attract and what we think the profile of an officer or a public safety person should be in the community, and how we can better meet our goals to have a community that's reflective of the diverse ethnic and racial makeup of Somerville.
Thank you both. Mayor Siddiqui, thank you for being with us. I'd like to get your perspective and that of the city of Cambridge, and to learn a little bit more about what your city is doing to diversify its officer workforce.
Sure. Yeah, we're doing a lot of similar things as Patricia mentioned earlier. We really want to focus on getting individuals from our community who've grown up in Cambridge, right? And that's a big part of this. And more and more we're seeing officers, because of the systems that are in place and have been in place, many, don't live in the community. And so we have been reflecting on that. And so our cadet program has been growing and, will continue to grow. And we have, officers, we have a new group of officers coming online, which is probably the most diverse in recent history. And so I think we're certainly, it's definitely a challenge, but it's something our commissioner, our city has placed a lot of value on. And other things, just related to, I want to touch on a few things in addition to what Patricia mentioned, because I will say, I think our Cambridge Police Department is a true model on many, many, many things. And we, one thing I did want to mention was our Office of Procedural Justice, which is the first of its kind in the country. And this is something our Commissioner Brandon Bard was very committed to doing as soon as he got here. And it's very exciting for us because it really goes back to this point of transparency that's key, and accountability in policing. And so this Office of Procedural Justice will be monitoring all of our citizen police interactions for looking at possible racial profiling and racially based policing, including use of force incidents. So, this will help us look at our department, look at our assessing the department's compliance with statutes, with ordinances, regulations. And so it's also going to give the community a big chance and the opportunity to work with the police department on how we can improve interactions with the public, right? And that's the goal here. It's all about relationships. And I think whatever work we can do, and that includes hiring diverse staff, but also these other policies that our police can put in place that will increase trust, that will increase transparency and accountability. And so I wanted to mention that because it is a very unique thing that we've set up and really are excited to get going.
Thank you, Mayor. We are getting a little close to 11:30. I did want to let people know that we will be going a little bit over, and the Mayor is happy to stay a little bit later just to answer, we've got a multitude of questions. Even if we don't get to them today, and likely we will be trying to answer those questions. And as the Mayor mentioned earlier, we're going to be having consistent dialogues. This is just not it. This is one of conversations that we will be having with you, and it needs to be continuous. So just know that it is much more than just today's conversation. Thank you for your answers. Another question came in, and I'm going to read it. I understand that Massachusetts has some progressive community support networks that work together with the police. However, people of color are still expressing fear of the police in Boston, and I heard many stories of violent and dangerous behavior by the Somerville police at our budget meeting this past week. As a white social worker, how do you expect to properly maintain the safety of people of color's calls when police immediately heighten fear? How can our city reform our current policing system if the foundation of trust between city residents and police are broken? So I think this question is really more getting at that relationship. So I don't know if Chief and Patty want to answer to that, building on that trust.
Sure. So I think, to go back to what Madam Mayor said from Cambridge, it's about relationships and building relationships. If somebody is, whether it's real or perceived fear of the police, we have to mend that. We're not going to do it by going into separate camps, so to speak, or going into silos. We're going to fix that by engaging with each other, listening to each other, and coming to an understanding. And this isn't about policing in the community. This is about us. This is about us. This is about everybody, about every human being, making a better world for everybody. One of the questions said, what do you want to see in 5, 10, 15 years? I want to see equality in income. I want to see equality in education. I want to see equality in housing. I want to see policing, that's perfect. Let's get there. Let's work together. If there's fear in the community, whether it's real or perceived, listen, I want to talk to you. I want to sit down. I want to introduce you to some of the police officers. I want you to know who they are. We're very diverse. Police department, we strongly reflect our community. We're working to increase our diversity every day. Let's listen to each other. Let's talk. If I'm on one silo and you're on another silo, we lose. And for me, as chief of police, I'll never buy into disengaging with the community. I've been in policing for 21 years. I see the good that police officers do every day. I'm humbled by the work of the men and women of the Somerville Police Department. I'm humbled by their commitment to change, their commitment to progressive policing. I'm humbled by their bravery. I'm honored to stand behind them in the tough times. I'm humbled to stand with this community during difficult times. But let's listen to each other. Let's really take the time. Let's listen to each other, and let's make progress and improvement together. That's how we need to move forward.
If I could add to it as a social worker, absolutely that is real. And so we have worked, and so that's the ideal of having a civilian unit embedded in the police department. We reach out to people after officers identify that someone may be in need of assistance. We emphasize that we do not have anything to do with the criminal side. We are just concerned about ensuring that they have the resources that they need. Again, we've worked with many people. My staff, I've done it a number of times. If someone is concerned, we'll meet them at Dunkin' first. We'll talk to them outside of the department. I've gone outside to the street to meet with people and to respect that their perspective is real. It is real. I mean, if you listen to the national news, again, it's understandable that people may have concerns. I'm not saying at all that it's not valid, but we need to, again, as the chief said, work together, get to know people. If you go to any, I've been struggling and grappling with understanding how to move beyond just policy to really true change. Have been part of many conversations. And there's so much misinformation. People think when they walk into the police lobby that somehow there's going to be an alarm going off that, they had a parking ticket or they have a warrant. I'm like, listen, no one's going to approach you when you're here to meet with a staff person or even come in to address a records issue or a parking issue. We are a community building. There are so many public meetings that occur in our academy room. So I always tell people are here in the Somerville Police Department for a various range of reasons. This is not bad people coming to the police department. These are community members seeking guidance. And I would tell you that we're looking at disparities. If you think that folks with behavioral health don't need a police response, we know that there are already existing disparities in healthcare where people, because of their mental health concerns, are minimized, don't get appropriate access to healthcare like diabetes and other treatments because they say, they're minimized, they're dismissed. I've been really working against that with the police department as well, to really inform that people also have needs. They want to know that they feel safe. Sometimes officers will try to say, hey, you know what? I think our core staff are better suited to help you. And people are like, no, I don't want to talk to a social worker about mental health. I want to feel safe in my community. I want to know that my police department is going to serve me. I want to know that they are going to take my concerns seriously. So again, these are complicated issues. And I don't think that we can just slap on, kind of broad changes that are based on national issues without looking internally. When you talk about a model of change, a changing culture, we've been working on that model. It's called CIT. We were one of the first departments to be funded through the Department of Mental Health. We also have programs with the State Department of Public Health. Why? Because they recognize the important role. And this is something I emphasize in our training with officers. Officers also feel burdened. Similarly to, kind of when I've worked with school professionals. It's like, the schools are mandated to resolve every social ill. Now the police somewhat feel that way, right? We're tasked with managing. And my point is no. Everyone in our community has an important role to play in ensuring the safety and well-being. So many times folks would rather talk to an officer. I'll give you an example. I got a call from an agency, a community service provider, to say, Patty, I'm concerned about suicidal ideation for this individual. They're not home, their phone's not working. I know they're in the community, they frequent this spot. I said, okay, I'm going to, our protocol is that we don't go out if we don't know the person. If we know the person, sure, we're going to meet them in the community, but just to ensure safety, because there's two sides to safety, don't forget. If I put myself in a vulnerable position and someone then assaults me, that's a criminal charge for them. I want to avoid that. So I went out with an officer, go to the location, the officer is like, hey, how you doing? They had a whole conversation. The officer knew their family. They knew about other struggles they were having. The officer in that conversation, the person said, no, I'm fine. I don't have any mental health issues. I'm good. But in talking with the officer's engagement, they were able to identify that that individual had a medical health issue. And it was through combination of myself, the officer, and fire coming to determine that, you know what, this person really needs to be seen at a hospital for their medical, physical health. So again, we cannot, these are complex responses. And I can tell you that people who are engaged, who are already don't have violent, there are services. There are lots of case management. There are, kind of care managers in healthcare systems that are available and are working with them. So these are different, more complicated responses.
Thanks, Patty.
Just 2 points on that, because to more narrowly to the question about what we can do under the current system, because as we reimagine something new, how do we elevate transparency and accountability so we can ensure trust and credibility with the public? Because without that, we're not going to be an effective public safety unit. We learned this last year, the most recent example, in our response to the Straight Pride Parade. There was a lot of criticism and concern about how we deployed to that response to assist other units in Boston. Chief and I and other leaders attended those community conversations. Those struck a chord with us, and together with the community made other suggestions. And these are important ones that continue to work on implementing. The Citizens Oversight Committee that will work with the City Council and community leaders on. The Chief's effort to civilianize internal affairs and professional standards investigations. The fight to get body cameras worn by all officers who have more transparency. And I would say also to support the Black and Latino caucus leaders' efforts to, again, create an independent prosecutorial investigative unit for police misconduct. Get it out of the district attorney's office and the local clerk magistrates and other reforms around civil service and arbitration, which make it very difficult for communities. Sometimes it takes years to separate or terminate an officer for misconduct and the cost of tens of thousands of dollars.
Thank you both. I know we're over time. I just want to pose one more question because we've had a lot of questions come in and we're going to be working to answer those. Again, for folks who are interested in joining our listening sessions, we are going to be putting that information in the chat box. Please do sign up. We are here to continue this dialogue, but I do want to have one more question before we go. This one is posed to the mayors of Somerville and Cambridge. We've talked a little bit about this already today, but the question is, how are the mayors of Somerville and Cambridge, including those closest to the pain, what meetings, efforts, or task forces will empower Black people in these situations? Mayor Siddiqui, do you want to start?
Sure, yeah, so right now we're going through, members who reached out, community members who reached out. We're looking at key organizations, whether that's the NAACP, we have other very prominent other organizers, and make sure we, asking them, what a task force could look like, and really doing, some informal listening sessions to shape, the next, the work around this, because it would be easy for me to say, as mayor, I want to do a task force. This is what the idea will be. These are the goals, but that doesn't sit well with me. It's about, okay, there is this aspect of, oh, the city's always doing task force. There's always doing reports, and where do they go? And I've been the first to criticize on that. And so for me, it is about taking, many of the voices that have emailed us, called us, and said, this is what I think you should be doing, and reaching out to those folks and getting feedback from them as we lay out a very detailed proposal that's informed by members of the community. So those are things that are happening and have been happening the last few weeks, and will continue to happen the next few weeks as we finalize a plan for what a task force on race and policing will look like. But I'll be sharing more details about that to Cambridge residents, and so will the city manager and Commissioner Bard and others in the next week or two.
Thank you, Mayor Siddiqui.
Yeah, and I would just like to add to what the mayor said. First, thank her for her leadership in Cambridge, because I'll tell you, we're so close to each other. And I look to leaders I'm inspired by, Mayor Siddiqui, Ayanna Presley, Rachel Rollins, Yvonne Spicer, Ellen Barr, Andre Green, and others, because their voices are important in this conversation to be elevated and amplified. And one thing I learned is not to be prescriptive, although well-intended. You know, as a white progressive leader, we want to do good things, but we got to get away from self-congratulatory pats on the back and say, okay, how can we help launch the work? And the voices we want to amplify are empowered in our community, but to give the resources to do the work and be part of it, to be on the edge of our seats and not sit back. And that's important for everyone to hear. We have to continue to challenge us and challenge white Americans, especially, to own the work and not to, again, continue forward after we go through these conversations and discussions, that we still allow a system, not just policing, an overall system in our society that runs ramshot over Black and brown people and suppresses those voices. We cannot allow that to remain. So there are some particular things we started now and around the racial, we are beginning, but we're looking for those voices to help shape and mold the conversations around bringing the community in, to develop the mission around the Racial and Social Justice Project, hiring the director to help form the department, to help form the work around reimagining policing, as well as around Citizens Oversight Committee. We'll be publishing all that, but I would ask you for your help, your perspective, your experience, and your input will guide us in terms of what that should look like and what the opportunity should be.
Thank you, Mayor. I think we are going to have actually room for one more question. Where is the city at with body cameras for police? Why is everyone not in favor of transparency?
Thank you for this question. I will say to you that this has been a fight that's been very frustrating for about 5 years now, and the chief, I'm sure, will add to this. We know that just diversifying a police department doesn't ensure against police misconduct or brutality, but it's important. We know the benefits of having a department, and like any agency or organization, that is truly reflective of the diversity and demographics of your community. Likewise, body cameras won't ensure that we won't have any cases of police brutality and misconduct, but they do give an important record and account of what happened. What if we didn't have cell phones now that could record, and that was a lynching in public of George Floyd and murder? And just, I want, especially white Americans, to understand that there are hundreds and hundreds of cases like that happened before we had the ability to record those incidents that are lost, that we have no record of. So it's important that we have body cams as another instrument to elevate transparency and accountability in our police department. I believe in the chief police, we should have them instituted, and they should be worn by all, but it is the subject. And one of the things we're trying to change we have to collectively bargain that and negotiate that with the union. We do not have that unilateral discretion to implement it, or else I submit to you, we would have by now. It has been a top priority of ours, and we are committed to it, can stay on it until we get it. And I'm sure that.
Yeah, I don't want to just re-echo what the mayor stated, but we have been working at this, and we've been at the table with the union, and I think we're close. I think the rank and file at the Somerville Police Department embraced the concept of body cameras, and I think we're close to moving forward, and we need to move forward. We've gone as far as supplying the union with a policy, and with body cameras, you do need a very strong policy around body cameras, and we've worked with that. So it's not the it's not the ultimate fix, so to speak, but it's definitely it's a step in the right direction, and it's another step on that road to progress, and in improving our profession. So I think the rank and file accept the idea of body cameras and welcome it. They welcome it. They want to show you what they do. They want to show you how they act. And believe me, I can't wait to see the footage. Because I'll say it again, you have very good men and women serving this police department that are empathetic, compassionate, brave. So I hope we see body cameras on every officer soon and embrace that new technology that has improved greatly over the 5 years that we've been talking about. We've been watching the improvements. Some of the body cameras now, if you use any of your defensive tools, the cameras turn on immediately and the officers can't shut the camera off. Let's embrace this technology. Let's continue to follow it. And I think you'll be very happy to see the actions of the men and women of the Somerville Police Department.
Thank you all. We've gone a bit over time, and I want to be mindful of the time for our panelists who've committed their time this morning. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you to our residents for tuning in, for your questions, for your ideas. Like I said before, this is going to be a continuous conversation. Today is not the end of this. Absolutely, by no means. We have included the listening sessions in the chat box. Please do sign up to learn more about that. I do thank you to our panelists. I do want to give this over to Mayor Curtatone to
Thank you, Nancy,
to
you for all the work you do facilitating the public conversations and dialogues with so many of our vulnerable populations. And I do want to thank all our panelists, the Chief, Patty Contete, but especially my colleague, the Mayor of Cambridge, Sumbul, Siddiqui, and to you, the public. We want to hear you. Our job's to listen, but we need to hear you. The work we have to do is complex. Again, it's going to make us feel uncomfortable. We should be made to feel uncomfortable. All I ask is that we listen and hear together. We are informed as we make decisions, but I am confident that we can reimagine policing. Notwithstanding the great work we've done for the past 15 to 17 years in reforming the Somerville Police Department, we can reimagine a new model that sets a standard for the Commonwealth, for the country, that really addresses all the needs on a day-to-day basis for our society, at a human level. I'm so grateful for all the input and commentary you've given us so far. I ask you to continue to be engaged. I know you will. I will be speaking with the Chief at the Monday's budget meeting on policing in front of the City Council. We look forward to working collectively together on what that future is. But I, for one, know that we will not let the murders of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, Rashad Brooks, so many others be forsaken. While the circumstances around each of those deaths may have been different, the root cause of each was the same, and that's racism. And while we're having a really concentrated conversation about policing now, we have a tremendous amount of impactful work that has to be done. And we have to own that work if we're going to truly eviscerate racism from every system, every institution, every program of our society. And that's going to mean us, especially white Americans, to start questioning our own personal prejudices and problematic beliefs. Again, it's not going to be easy, but it wasn't meant to be easy. So I look forward as a white ally, an anti-racist, to do that work with you. So thank you very much for joining in today, and we look forward to the next conversation and the work that we have to undertake. Take care.